Mastering something is the difference between simply knowing about a subject and a near complete comprehension of the subject. It can also mean being superior at something. So my goal for you is to take you from not knowing much about Alpha Strike to being comfortable playing your first games, be it at home with a friend or at your local game club, at a high level past just what a beginner might know. Even if you know how Alpha Strike works, this is going to be a massive video, so I hope to include some tips useful to even the most seasoned hobbyist, including some I need to follow myself, or maybe just enough lame jokes. So grab a beverage of your choice and settle in. Just don't mix it up with your paint water and we'll get started. You may have gotten your start with the Battletech universe in the Mechwarrior PC games, just like I did. You may be enthralled by house-sized walking tanks. You might be here because you are looking for alternative miniature games to what GW offers, and Battletech was recommended to you. However you ended up here, welcome. I wanted to first explain Step 0, deciding if you should play Alpha Strike. I think you should. But I'm biased. I still can explain why, though. I enjoy fast-paced miniature games. Miniature games bring me more immersion over traditional board games like classic Battletech. The rules bring me structure and a bit of randomness. The rest I can figure out with my imagination. My first miniature game was Battletech, followed shortly by another game by the FASA Corporation, Vor the Maelstrom. I faffed about with other miniature games over the intervening 25 years or so, but here I am, back where it all started. Why Alpha Strike? Alpha Strike gives me all the narrative depth that I have come to live for in the Battletech universe. You can play out a complete story on the tabletop with just enough abstraction to let your creativity fill the gaps. It is easy to learn, yet difficult to master. Tournaments love Alpha Strike, as the games can be resolved in a reasonable amount of time with a force large enough to catch eyes, drawing in newcomers, and has lots of tactical and strategic options to mix things up, without needing a large number of rulebooks on hand. So in short, it's all the things you know and love about Battletech at a pace that busy dads can enjoy, or busy students, or busy retirees. Time is a valuable commodity, no matter who you are. So hopefully this has convinced you to give Alpha Strike a try if you weren't already convinced. You can download the free rules, use your miniatures you were going to use in Classic, or even 3D print some, but you didn't hear that from me, and throw down a game in a few hours. But if you want the complete experience, I recommend getting the Alpha Strike introductory box set at the least. It's about the cost of a new video game. It has printed rules, a solid collection of miniatures to start your collection, dice, some cool buildings and trees to use as terrain, counters, pretty much everything you need to get started. A few things outside of this box might be helpful if you are brand new and trying to determine what you will need, so here is a list of the things I usually use in a game outside of the introductory box. A measuring tape. This is just the easiest way to find distances. It doesn't have to be huge. In fact, I prefer smaller ones, like the 12-foot ones. It does need to have inches, as that is the measurement by which this game is played. Ignore that mark at 5 inches on my tape measure. It's not related. A single pair of dice come in the box, but I find it is handy to have extra pairs of 6-sided dice in different colors. This will make some things easier. I'll explain later. I recommend, if you have them or can get them easily, to have some red dice, some yellow dice, some white dice, then whatever other colors please your brain as you rattle the clacky math rocks around. Unit cards often come with the miniatures, but if you want to run something that isn't included, you can always take a look at the free resource, masterunitlist.info. That website gives you access to a powerful tool that you can use to look up the game stats for any model, and it's free. It is a really powerful boon to players of Alpha Strike. Who knew the internet could be used for things other than arguing about fictional settings online? For bonus points, you can get trading card sleeves and dry erase markers and keep them pristine. The Alpha Strike standard table measures around 4 foot wide by 4 foot long. This is what a lot of tournaments play on. If you have a kitchen table that large, or a larger one even, it's a great place to play. You don't need the fancy game mats or a purpose-made board, but it does add to the immersion if you like that sort of thing. A lot of times, your local hobby shops might have something suitable, so it's worth doing a quick search on Google or Facebook and checking out a few in your local area if you don't have a place to play yourself. or if you don't want strangers finding out that you are a miniature hoarder by coming into your home. The most overlooked part might be an opponent. A willing victim. Opponent is something you will need for this, as it is not a single-player experience. Yet. Later, in 2025, that may change, but at the time of recording, you still need to react with another human. Married folks will generally try and rope their spouses in with varying degrees of success. As for me, I usually bribe family members into playing. It helps to brush up on your social skills, such as being polite, non-stinky, and even-tempered. A good place to try is, again, the local game shop or club, so give them a shot. You might use my method to convince an acquaintance to give it a shot with bribery, but make sure you're not being creepy about it, or doing anything illegal. But it is 2025 and I don't ever assume the bar is too low. A copy of the rulebook is handy no matter how you acquire it. There is a quick start rulebook in the box, and they also host this on the Catalyst website for free, though I've never used the one off the website since I had the one in the box. The expanded version of the rules, called the Commander's Edition, comes and goes in availability on the website in printed form, but it should be available to purchase at all times as a PDF document from their website if you don't mind using a computer or tablet. They have downloadable tables that you can print out if you just need some quick references during the game, so a PDF is perfectly fine to just have as a reference if you come across anything you need answered during the game. I'll be starting with the Quick Start rulebook, but know that some rules will show up from the Commander's Edition, as that is the full version of the rules and the most supported with updates in errata. I will assume you'll use the models that come in the Alpha Strike box, but if you like other designs from other Force Packs or box sets, you can use those too. Now that you have all those things, let's go over the basic tenets of the game. To start, math. I hate math, but I love this math. For your first games, ignore my other video I made about building the ultimate fighting force of battle mechs. Just add up this value at the top of the cards, picking mechs until your total is the same as your opponent's total. That will do for now. It is not complicated, but in time you will learn the proper way to make a force. You will understand. But for your first games, take what interests you. Let's say 100 will be your cap. That is enough for a handful of models, which will make your first games fast and easy. These small games are the baby food of Alpha Strike, easy to digest and play, possibly will end up a mess, but you will learn. You will grow teeth, metaphorically, of course. Unless? This is, at its core, a very large board game. Board games are usually played in turns. Alpha Strike is played in turns. Alpha Strike is more than turns, however. When your opponent gets to do something, you don't have to wait long before you get to do something. There is no need for complicated reaction phases or anything like that. Instead, the game is built on the initiative your side shows at the beginning of the turn. So we start with the initiative roll. Both players roll a dice. We sometimes call these single die a d6. Whoever has the higher number is the winner. The winner goes last. But wait, I hear you cry out. Why do they go last? Shouldn't they go first if they won? But alas, no. You will understand. In this turn-based game, things are meant to be happening at the same time. When your mech moves, your opponent's mech is also moving. When your mech is shooting, they can shoot too. This adds to the immersion. So winning the initiative means that your force can react to the decisions of your opponent. If he chooses to go over there, you can go over here. It does not prevent your opponent from doing something, but rather allows you to make better decisions based on what they are doing. So the winner goes last. Scenarios are the conditions for winning the game. Normally, you pick a scenario here, but we don't want win conditions, we crave violence, and violence is what we shall have. For your first games, a straight-up fight is enough. Whoever is left standing wins, but we must set up our board. Buildings, trees, rocks, books, whatever you use to decorate this cupcake that is your game board, just try to remember that we are trying to make it interesting. Have obstacles that your models can hide behind. Take turns with your opponent, placing terrain features or buildings until you are satisfied. I recommend no less than 25% board coverage, but I usually take more. That amount fits into 1/4 of the board for easy reference while collecting your terrain pieces. And this is a great starting point. Once the board has been set, play can begin. The one who won the initiative roll can do something crazy. and can instead choose to make the decision first by picking what edge of the board will be their home edge. The other player takes the edge of the table opposite. Now that play has begun, compliment your opponent. Tell him or her that they look nice. Remember that this is a game and is not a reflection of you as a person. Your behavior, however, is a reflection of you as a person, so be on your best. Usually the models start off table. They do not start on the board unless the scenario calls for it. In our game, we don't start on the board. We march proudly instead. To find out who gets to claim the higher honor of being first to march, we again roll the dice. Get used to this, as it is the beginning of every game turn. This is called the initiative phase. The winner goes last, the loser goes first. Just as before, but this time it's for the game turn and not just the setup of the game. With that, you are now taking your baby steps into the first real phase of the game, and a part of your first turn, the movement phase. As the name implies, you get to move things. The player who is moving things chooses what to move. In larger games, you will move groups. In this small game, we'll instead pick one at a time to move. So the player chooses a mech. Since this is the first turn and we are marching proudly onto the battlefield, we look at its unit card to see how much marching we get to do. I select my first mech. I see his movement allowance, and much like my allowance when I was growing up taking care of sled dogs, I cannot spend more than this without first asking my mom. I carefully begin my measurement, starting at the edge of the table on one side of the board, my home edge. I count, painstakingly because I hate math, the number of inches listed on the card, and that is how far I can go with any point of the base. I cannot cheat and use a back corner to achieve more movement. No part of the base, the hexagon, can go further. I can choose to move less though, if I prefer. As I move the model, I keep a few things in mind. He has a face of a sort, therefore a facing. This is the direction of the front of the mech. Some people use the legs, but the legs are not a face, so I cannot agree. But this is a lie because I do use the legs quite often to show the front of the battle mech. Either way is fine as long as it is clear. Some people mark the front of the base, some mark the back of the base. Either is fine. You cannot turn your model, changing its facing, outside of the movement phase. You understand. Also, my mech cannot travel through other mechs unless they are his friends, in which case he can give them a little squeeze on the cheek as he passes. It's okay because they are friends. But if they are not friends, they cannot move through each other. Regardless of their Facebook statuses, no model may end its movement with its base overlapping another, even if they are at different heights. Failure in this results in death for that model. I also think of rocks. Rocks are terrain. Terrain can block your movement. Using this table, you can see what happens to your mech as it tries to move through something. Your mech cannot scale walls like a lizard, so you must go around sheer surfaces if it is over 2 inches tall. If it is less than 2 inches tall, you may go over it. Changing a level like this costs movement, and my mom takes it away from my allowance. 2 inches of movement allowance is taken per 1 inch traversed in this fashion. That means it would cost you a total of 3 inches of your total allowance to go from the ground to the top of a 1 inch tall rock you are right beside, assuming no other terrain is there. I also think of trees. Trees have an area. This area should be marked when making your board setup. When going through a bunch of trees, mechs cannot move as fast. Just like before, if I move my mech through the trees with any part of my hexagonal base, my mother takes some of my allowance. 1 extra inch of allowance is taken per inch of movement through the trees, meaning that each inch through the trees really costs you at least 2 inches of movement, in addition to any other terrain changes, like elevation. There are many more types of movement. Water, rough terrain, building rubble, paved roads, they all have a place on the chart, and I keep them all in mind when I make my move, keeping the chart handy for reference, and thus I understand movement. Therefore, you understand. When I am finished moving my solitary battle mech onto the battlefield, my opponent does the same. He moves his mech, starting his measurement from a place along the home edge, just as I did. He can choose to sprint, which allows for 1.5 times, rounded down, the amount of movement that his mech can make. However, if you choose to sprint, your mother will take away your weapons and you will not be able to shoot in the same turn, so keep that in mind. We alternate, one after the other, moving the remaining battle mechs that have not yet moved. If I have a letter next to my movement allowance on the unit's game card, it means he's special. My mother said so. I can see how special by referring to the unit movement mode table to see what the letter represents. Each has a unique twist on movement, as you can see from the movement cost table. Some are allowed to move through terrain types, some are prevented. Trees are the natural enemy of the hover tank. They are cool with surface level water though. Mechs can move in different modes if desired. I asked my mom, and she said yes, you can spend more allowance, but you will get no weapons later for dessert. I begrudgingly agree, and can add half of the movement number to the total I can move. I then be sure to mark the unit as sprinting, as that will be important later, and is a symbol of my dedication to speed. Some can fly through the air. The J after this one means that it has jump jets, and can use them to soar over the battlefield, but only for a little while. He must return to the ground eventually, and must end his movement on the ground. He cannot use both this jump with a normal movement, he must decide which he is using before moving the model. This probably goes without saying, but you cannot sprint your jump jets. They get what they get. Jumping ignores all terrain costs for the terrain being traversed, and may jump in any direction regardless of facing, as well as land facing in any directions. My mech does a kickflip. Very cool. There are more rules. Tanks can go hull down. Some units can transport infantry. We won't bother with those rules yet, that'll come later in other games. We do this until all have moved, or at least have been given the opportunity, until they are all marching proudly on the game board. Then we go to the next phase, the combatening. We begin the combat phase. Since it is still the same game turn, we do not need to roll a d6 for initiative yet. The one we did at the start of the turn was enough. During this phase, each unit can decide to deliver a single attack against a singular foe. If a unit cannot attack for whatever reason, or wants to be a coward, it does not have to attack. You start with the initiative loser, and that loser picks a mech to do combat that hasn't done combat yet this turn. So you see, you understand. Your mech sees, it understands. It is not all seeing, however. A straight line must be able to be drawn from the mech to something it wants to target without being interrupted. It helps to be as the miniature, stooping down unceremoniously to see what it can see. If less than 1/3 of the model is visible behind something dense like a cliff or a building, it is too little to see and therefore not a valid target for standard shooting. Miniatures can only see up to 42 inches without permission from their mother. Special rules can affect this, such as if there's a blizzard on the battlefield, smoke, or some other environmental condition. This is called line of sight, or LOS. If you can see it, it is within LOS. If not, it is not within LOS. You understand. Woods do not automatically block line of sight. Instead, use the direct line method. LOS is only blocked if 6 inches or more of this line crosses through the area of the woods. Woods also make your shooting worse. Trees are the natural enemy of the marksman as well. More rules may apply. Ground units touching tips can see each other, unless one is in a hot tub stream or otherwise submerged in the water. Intervening units do not block line of sight in most cases. Partial cover is granted to units that are more than 1/3 hidden by a solid object, as I said before. Rocks and buildings can also be the natural enemy of the marksman. He has many enemies. Indirect fire is special. It can ignore intervening terrain, but another unit must act as a spotter to tell the indirect firer where to shoot. At the bottom of the unit card, you'll sometimes see acronyms. The military love acronyms, and this is a game about fake future militaries, so this makes sense. You understand. The acronym for indirect fire is IF. And if the unit card has these letters together like this, you can use indirect fire. Your mech's face tells you about its firing arc. This is the angle in which the targets are valid to your mech. Along the back edge of your unit's base, that is out of your firing arc. Everything else is within it. Exclusions may apply. Infantry don't have a firing arc, so they can shoot all over the place. Units with the turret special rule, TUR, can swivel to any direction, but only with the weaponry mounted on that turret, which is what the numbers stand for. Speaking of weapons, we make a weapon attack. First, we declare the unit we want to fire. Then, we pick its target. Next, we use math using Sator. Sator is not a weird type of space gator. It's an acronym. This acronym is to help you remember the different numbers used when making an attack with your mech's weapons. It goes like this. Skill, attacker movement, target movement, other, range. We start with the skill. The base skill for all units is 4. So make sure to fill in all your unit cards with a skill of 4 for this battle. This is regular and not special. Lower numbers are better. We now perform the magic of math. For this game, we are starting at 4. Then we look at how our shooting mech has moved in its movement phase of this turn. Did it sprint? If so, then Mom says no weapons allowed. Did it jump? Then it gets +2, which we use our superior brains to add to the 4 we started with. We are now at 6. We understand and we continue doing math. Target movement is based on how the target moved during the movement phase of this turn. Did it stand still? Did it do a regular ground movement? Has it suffered a horrible accident, rendering it unable to move at all? We consult the table. We see that our target made a regular move. So what is its TMM? TMM is the target movement modifier. A unit gets to benefit from this whenever it moves. It makes shooting it harder. Our target has a TMM of 2, so we add 2 with our math genius. We are now at 8. We press on. Other modifiers include a lot of things. Partial cover from rocks, buildings, woods, water, etc. It can also include a modifier if your mech is hot. No, I don't mean attractive. I'm robosexual, so they're all attractive. I mean that it's generated heat from something, which we will cover later. Any other damage sustained to the firing mech that affects accuracy, such as critical damage to the fire control system, is covered in this section. Consult the Sator table for more possible other modifiers. Lastly, we check our range. How many inches separate the firing unit from the target? It falls into 3 main brackets of ranges. If it is up to 6 inches, an admirable length, it is short range. I'm insulted. From 6 inches to 24 inches is medium range. This is where the bulk of your combat takes place in my experience, so this is an important range bracket. The final range bracket is long, which takes its place at over 24 inches out to 42 inches, the limit of your normal sight. If we are in short range, there is no modifier. If we are at medium range, we add 2. If we are at long range, we add 4. If the target is base to base and touching with its foe, it can only deliver physical attacks and cannot shoot its weapons. We'll cover those later. Friends don't let friends touch tips. We measure the range and see that we are at medium range, so we add 2 again, and arrive at our final target number, TN, of 10. To complete our attack, we must roll 2 dice. We call this 2d6 because we love our acronyms. You understand. We must roll above this target number to hit our foe. Now you see why our numbers are so important and why lower skill ratings for our pilots are better. Rolling a 10 or better will be hard. I blow into my dice for luck. But before I roll, I introduce you to an optional rule that is not optional at my tables: multiple damage rolls. Under each range bracket on the unit card is a number value. This is how much damage the shooting mech has a possibility to inflict on a target in a single attack at a given range using a standard weapon attack. This is mathematically derived from complex formula taking into account all the weapons from that particular mech, as well as its effectiveness at using them at those ranges. And then it's rounded down into a nice whole number for us Alpha Strike enjoyers, who everybody knows can't do complex formulas. To simulate that you are probably not blowing your whole load every time you pull the trigger, we use variable damage rolls around here. This can be done in a few ways. I will tell you a few options here, but for a detailed look, I recommend this video, Rolling for Damage in Alpha Strike by Almost Variant. He goes over the various methods of using this rule, but I'll briefly describe a few here. Just remember to stick to the same method the entire game and clear it with your opponents first or verify it in your tournament rules packets. One method is rolling a 6-sided die that is the pilot die, then rolling a separate d6 for each point of damage in that range bracket. Pair each d6 with the result of the pilot die and add them together and you get a value for each. For example, if I rolled a 5 with the pilot die and then roll a 2, a 3, and a 5 for the other dice, I would only achieve 1 out of the 3 damage if our target number is 10. This is very popular in some formats. It helps flatten out the randomness curve a bit, causing a bit more consistent damage over time rather than concentrating it all into one big swing or losing it all with a big miss. Another way is to make the attack normally, then roll 1d6 for each point of damage, with a 4+ indicating the damage is applied. It's not bad, but kinda meh. It doesn't really help with the big swings of hit or miss, but just kinda reduces the overall damage done by the mechs. I am not a fan. The most common method, and the way my group does it, is that we simply roll 2d6 for every point of damage in the range bracket we are firing at, so that we can just roll a handful of dice at once. We ensure it is clear by matching every 2d6 pair in a distinct color. So I might roll a 2d6 of red, a 2d6 of white, and a 2d6 of yellow dice for a 3-point attack. Whichever pairs add up to over the required target number, or equal to, hit the target. This provides one of the flattest probability curves, math, but increases the chance of critical hits pretty substantially. My group actually prefers this because, as I will go over later, critical hits are awesome. You will understand. There are some extra rules that go along with this, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. If you are blessed by the dice gods and roll boxcars for your attack roll, meaning double 6s, or otherwise known as a natural 12, you get to apply an interesting effect on top of the damage to the target. This is called a through armor critical hit. We'll get there in a minute, but I wanted you to know they exist before we get any further. Only one critical hit can be applied per standard attack in this way, so if you are using multiple attack rolls, you still only get 1 per attack. If you achieved your goal of violence and successfully damaged the target, you apply the damage immediately. Note, however, that your mom will tell you to play nice until the end of the turn, which means that your opponent gets to take their turn before the damage changes anything. So if you blew up the mech, it still gets to make its turn, ignoring the effects of damage until the end of that turn. If you want to make a physical attack, that's different. First, you gotta get close enough. You can only make a physical attack against something that is within 1 inch using a standard physical attack. You cannot do both shooting and physical attacks. You have to pick one when you are activating the unit during its combat phase. It follows all the same rules of determining the number to roll as a regular attack, following Sator in a way, but dropping the R. So, Sato. Anyway, I don't know if I've ever used multiple attack rolls for this kind of attack. The damage is based on the size rating of your unit, listed as SZ or Z on the unit card. For a standard attack, it's equal to the size rating. If your unit has the MEL special rule, then it has a melee weapon. This does 1 extra damage, so it would be size +1. There are other special attacks, such as dropping on your opponent from above using jump jets, called Death from Above, ramming them, such as a charge, and anti-mech infantry attacks, apes together strong. They are quite rule dense and really situation specific, so they will probably get separate videos for the sake of brevity. You understand. Artillery might also fall under that category, again for the sake of brevity. It has a lot of its own mechanics, such as picking a target point, scattering, and area of effect. It's a lot. Most tournaments limit the amount of artillery you can take for good reason. It is quite strong against certain targets. For now, we'll move on to the next part of the equation. Although not a separate phase, as it happens immediately, it's a big section, so I think it deserves its own header. The damage ending. Important to remember that this damage won't take effect until the end phase. You do need to immediately apply it after an attack, but any effects, such as accuracy modifiers, heat, or even death, don't take effect until the end phase. Your mech has a face, or at least a facing. This is important. Since you cannot change your facing outside of movement, it determines where your ass is, and getting shot in the ass is not good. For battle mechs, the rear edge of their base is the rear facing. That means if you drew a line from the center of the base and extended it out behind the mech, with that line intersecting the corner of each side of that rear edge, it would draw the arc that indicates the rear facing of the mech. If you get shot there, you are gonna have to sit on a donut for a while because it does an extra point of damage when an attack is successful from that direction. Note, using multiple attack rolls, you cannot trigger this extra damage more than once, so it's only ever one extra damage. You can, however, trigger this extra damage if you and a friend tag team that ass. Wait, no, forget I said that. You understand. There are a bunch of cool things that can happen with damage, however. If your mech has an OV value under their heat gauge, that means, before you attack, you can choose to pump up your mech's heat gauge and deliver extra damage, as long as you are sticking to the short or medium range brackets. The OV value is the maximum heat you can pump, with a corresponding damage increase. This means that for a mech with an OV of 2, you can choose to take on 2 points of heat, or just 1, or none at all, and get a corresponding damage boost equal to the amount of heat you took. We'll talk more about this later in the heat section. Some units are so pathetic that they struggle to do even one solitary point of damage. These sad sacks are usually noted by a 0 with an asterisk, aka that little star thing. They roll a single attack for this, and if they successfully hit the target, they then have to confirm that damage was done with an additional d6. On a result of 4 or higher, it worked, and a point of damage is applied to the target. If it is a 1 through a 3, the target is fine and mocks the firing unit relentlessly for its failure to perform under pressure. It doesn't happen to everybody. So the attack hits. You are dealing damage to the target. What now? Well, on the unit cards, you'll see 2 rows of little circles. One is marked A, or armor, and the row on the bottom is S, for structure. When your mech takes damage, you fill in a number of those little bubbles equal to the damage being applied. Starting with armor, applying the points sequentially. Once you reach the end of the armor, you start on the structure for all the remaining damage points, as well as any subsequent damage. Armor is mostly safe. You take damage there without too much trouble. But when your structure starts taking damage, or if your opponent was lucky and rolled a through armor critical hit, that's when things get dicey for you. Mechs are kind of like little eggs, some more than others. Their hard armor shell protects their gooey insides. But when that gooey inside starts to take damage, they might start to lose critical systems that keep the mech functioning. When a critical hit is determined either by taking structure damage or by a through armor critical hit, among other causes, the attacker rolls 2 dice and consults the critical hit table for the unit type receiving this blessing. Some of these effects are far worse than others. If the attacker is extremely lucky, they can destroy the unit outright with a result of 12 on this table. They may cook off its ammo in a massive ammo explosion, which has the potential to also destroy the vehicle outright if they do not have special rules to protect them from that outcome. There are a myriad of other annoyances that can also affect a unit, such as cutting their movement speed, damaging a weapon system, or frying the fire control system to make its weapons less accurate. You might even damage the expensive engine housed within, generating extra heat every turn as its fusion containment fails. These debuffs last for the rest of the game, or longer if playing in a campaign, so critical hits are a real pain in the for any mech pilot. If your mech suffers a subsequent engine hit after the first, it will be destroyed. Reducing a unit's structure to 0 also destroys it, so avoid getting your engine punched by Gauss slugs wherever possible. With that covered, it's getting hot in here, but please don't take off your clothes. Another mechanic that can change during the combat phase, but doesn't begin to affect the unit until later. Heat is a resource that some units can take advantage of, either by increasing their damage or exploiting the effects of heat on others. On the unit card, you may see this scale. This is the heat scale. As your mech accumulates heat, this number go up. If you are standing in water or voluntarily hold off firing all weapons for the turn, you can make that scale go back down. Each point on this scale adds a modifier to your shooting attacks, so it is a constant push and pull for units that have the overheat ability to deal extra damage, where a lot of other units rarely have to bother with it. Some attacks forego damage and instead deal heat. Think flamethrowers or napalm missiles, called infernos. If a unit has the HT special rule, it can deal an amount of heat damage equal to the number in that range bracket. Heat can also mess with your movement. For each point of heat, you lose 2 inches of your movement allowance. Your mom does not like it hot unless I come over. Just like regular damage, heat damage is applied immediately, but won't take effect until later. This means that your unit can power up a shot with overheat if it has it, and this won't affect its accuracy immediately, but it will pay for it later. So how do you dump heat once you have it? As I mentioned, standing in water can help, but the primary method is waiting and not firing any weapons for an entire turn. Heat application is applied before cooling in most cases, the only exception being intentional overheating by pumping heat into the engine intentionally. I'm not sure why you would do this, as extra heat does not give you more potential damage for your attacks or anything. Maybe to power up certain special rules that rely on heat, like triple strength Myomer. Here is the full order of operations for a unit as listed in the rulebook. 1. Add any overheat damage used this turn. 2. Subtract 1 heat level if the unit is in depth 1 or more water. 3. Remove all heat levels if the unit did not make a weapon attack this turn. Remove all heat levels and restart the unit if the unit began this end phase shut down. 5. Add any external sources of heat, such as flamers, infernos, etc. If you fail to dump your heat and manage to climb the scale to 4 points, your mech can go into shutdown. It will remain that way until the next end phase. That means it can't move, shoot, use any special equipment like ECM or probes, and it suffers the immobile status, which means it can be targeted much easier than a target that is awake. You don't want to shut down. They will go straight for your every time. That's how they got Commander Paul Bridgewater. If you know, you know. And that is a complete game turn. Start back at the initiative phase and keep cycling through the phases until another turn is complete. Then another, then another. Keep going like that until only one of you has a model left on the board, or until the end of turn 6. And count up who killed more points value if you want a shorter game. That's all you need to know to play your first games of Alpha Strike. There is a lot more to cover, and if you all like this guide, I will certainly bow to my audience overlords and make more videos covering the more advanced topics to truly bring you up to speed on the play of this wonderful game. Just comment below and let me know what rules you want me to cover. Thank you for watching the video. I know it was a long one, especially if you already know how to play. Thank you to my Patreons. who would probably rather see me making more battle reports, but they keep paying me anyway. I get to be less serious in these videos, however, so I hope they enjoy them as much as I enjoy making them. Until next time, the battle will continue.